something like that, you're more than welcome to. Because there is like maybe 3 or 4 people brought in a chair because it's hard to stand for that long. Okay? So you're certainly welcome to do that. You can bring one right from the classroom even if you want to. So whatever you want to do there. When we're doing the table saw top, it's the same as any other machine out here that has a cast iron top. Make sure it's turned off, power's off to the machine. Take out the throat plate. Okay. Now if you have a bunch of sawdust or something on here, you want to brush it off. That sawdust is going to absorb whatever we put on here. Okay? Because we're going to be using wet dry sandpaper on here. And when you use wet dry sandpaper, it needs some sort of an agent to help it cut. Okay? So that for something like that, that's lacquer thinner, denatured alcohol, paint thinner. It could even, if you wanted to, be water, but you got to be very, very careful if you use water, because whatever you don't dry is going to rust. Okay? We use something like denatured alcohol or lacquer thinner or something like that. It's not going to rust if we miss something, if it hasn't dropped somewhere or whatever. Okay? Now, I like to use denatured alcohol when I do this because it's not very hard on your skin. It doesn't dry up immediately. Acetone dries super fast. And unlike paint thinner, one thing I don't like about using paint thinner is if it gets on the floor, you'll slip and kill yourself. I mean, paint thinner is like WD-40 almost if you spill it. Denatured alcohol won't. Now you can use acetone, you can use lacquer thinner, they'll work.
But you can't get denatured alcohol.
That's true. So what I've been using a lot of times is rubbing alcohol. Okay? I buy it right over at Rite Aid or whatever, drill 2 holes in the cap, and then you just squeeze it like a squeeze bottle. Okay? It'll work. It smells a little stronger. I'm sure it is stronger. But you can use that, or you could use acetone or lacquer thinner. The problem with them is they dry real fast. So as I'm sanding, they're flashing off, and I'm losing my solution. Okay? My cutting agent, if you will. Okay?
You got a question?
Yes. Oh, sorry.
You can get denatured alcohol off Amazon.
Oh, there you go. Okay.
They'll mail it to you.
Oh, so there you have it. Yeah. You just gotta be a billionaire and break the law, so that's fine. So
Go to the back.
after we brushed everything off, we have it nice and clean of particles. We're going to be putting on some denatured alcohol. Okay. The sandpaper we're using is 500 grit. Okay. Now it's up to you beyond that. You can go up to 1200 and comb your hair in this. You can do whatever you want. But here, I go to 500. Now, if you buy a table saw and the top is really, really bad, okay, then you can go down, use 120, something like that, okay, to cut through the rust or whatever quicker, okay. And depending on what kind of pitting you have, you may always have little spots that show up, okay. But if it's a pretty typical situation like this one is, just handprints have made some very light surface rust, just use 500 and be done with it, okay? Alright, so I'm going to put this on. Now if I was using acetone, I would stop right there and just work this one table, okay? But because it's denatured alcohol, it won't dry so fast, and I can let this sit while I'm working on this one, okay? Now I'm taking the sandpaper, and I'm using a piece that just scotched right behind it, okay? Because if I just sand with just my bare hand, all I have is the hot spots of my hand really pushing into this. If I have this, or I have a sponge, something like that, it's going to take out those hot spots. And it makes it easier for you to use, okay? So when we do this, we're going to start in one spot, working back and forth. You always want to work in the direction that the material is going to go through whatever tool it is, okay? Now the key to this is try and use an even progression on this, okay? So I don't want to say, oh, I have a rust spot here, I'll just get that. Because what can slowly happen is we start to form all sorts of shapes on this top instead of having a nice uniform flat surface. Okay? So we just want to go pretty much even the whole way. Now obviously we're removing a microscopic amount. So we don't have to be like, oh, I'm measuring this to make sure we're doing exactly the same on each step. It's nothing like that. I'm just saying, don't, because we get most of them here, so don't just sand the front of this saw, sand the whole top, okay? Now when we're doing the center part, particularly on a table saw, we do have to be a little careful of the blade. That we don't sand the tips of the blade, or that we don't accidentally touch our hand on it. Okay? So we're going to slowly work the surface. Okay, and at the end of the saw, that's where we're going to have stuff that runs off and falls onto the floor or something like that, depending on your table saw setup. That's where you want to be particularly conscious if you're using something like paint thinner. You don't want something slippery on the floor. Okay?
Sam, do you ever use WD-40?
You
on
can.
this?
Yeah, it's the same thing as the paint thinner though, because if you get it on the floor, you gotta be real careful. Okay. Now when you're doing this in your own shop, a lot of times, and maybe even on this one, we'll see, I probably didn't get all of it because I didn't spend as much time. Obviously we have a class to do here. But depending on how bad the rust is, it's going to determine how much time I'm going to spend on it. Okay? Next thing I'm going to do, I'm going to use a little more of the alcohol. Spread it on here. And we're going to wipe up the swart. Okay? So all this black stuff is what's left over from our sanding. That's a little bit of metal and mostly rocks. Okay? So we got to clean all that up.
What did you call it?
Swart.
Swart?
Yeah, yeah. S-W-A-R, I think P-H. Might be an F, I'm not sure. So I'm just gonna... Yeah. Okay.
So if you got a regular table saw at home that's got lots of rust, you would spend more time.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, ideally you'd go until it was gone. Like if I was doing this on my daily routine, I would go until all of this was gone here. Because you can still see some of the fingerprints because I didn't spend as much time as I usually would.
How much of that would you do as a preventative maintenance? Once a month? Once
With something like this on my own table saw at home, I wait until I see a bunch of fingerprints. You know?
I have a contractor saw, so it doesn't have bare metal. It has some sort of coating on it. Stain procedure though?
It depends. Because if that coating is preventing rust, you don't want to sand it off. Just coat it with wax. Okay? But if you're getting rust, the coating's obviously not doing anything, so then sand it. But a lot of companies put something like that on there, and you don't want to sand it off because it's doing you a favor.
How do you get rid of, so this will take care of all the sap and the wood and stuff like that?
Yes, yes. So now if you have a bunch of sap or contaminants on there, but you don't want to sand it, that's when you need to use acetone or something to break down whatever is
Do
on
you
there.
prefer acetone as opposed to denatured or anything like that?
If there's sap and pitch and stuff on there, paint thinner or acetone is going to take it off a lot better than alcohol will. Okay? So after we wipe that down once with the alcohol, I'm going to follow it up with a dry paper towel. Because it's going to pick up whatever was left on here.
So you wiped it down with 2 paper towels?
initially and then?
Yes, yes. So the first one's basically wet because I put down denatured alcohol, wipe it all up, and then this one is just a dry one to take off whatever's left. When you're doing the ways for the miter saw ways, you do want to be a little bit careful because some of these are sharp. These ones aren't because I've sanded them thousands of times and so the edges are worn off. But if you have a new table saw, you can cut yourself on these, okay? Same thing with inside the throat plate opening, okay? Now after we've done that, another thing I like about denatured alcohol is I can take this and I can throw it in the trash, okay? It's not gonna combust by being watered up. Okay. So now I'm gonna take paste wax. Now they just quit making Johnson's paste wax. Okay, this is the one I prefer, but you can just buy the Minwax paste wax. It works just as good. It's just for some reason it's more expensive, but it's basically the same stuff. Okay. So now you're gonna scoop that into. Let me show you here. What I like to do anyway, I scoop that into a paper towel. And then I fold that paper towel up so that it's basically captured inside. And I don't have to worry about the wax getting out and falling on the floor, okay? So now I can take this and coat the whole surface. If your table saw doesn't have rust, but you find that there's a lot of friction when you're using it, same is true of a planer or joint or anything else, you can just put wax on there. You don't have to sand it every time, okay? In my own shop I do that because it'll sit for a long time not get used, and the wax, I guess, it slowly evaporates off or it something. And even though there's no rust on anything, I'll notice parts will stick in the planer a little bit, and so I just wax it. And then it's good to go again. Don't even bother with the sanding.
Sam, do you specifically recommend using paper towels, or can you use cloth?
You can use cloth. I just like the paper towels because they're so thin I can capture it pretty easy and it still squeezes through. If you use a cloth, you more or less have to dip the cloth and rub it on because it's not going to soak through the cloth very easily. So after we've done that, usually what I do, take a paper towel, and I'm just going to wipe off the excess real quick, okay? Because we put this on, we just put it on, so it hasn't dried yet, okay? But if we leave a lot of excess wax on here, it's not going to dry anytime soon, okay? Now, also, when I was talking about when we wipe this thing down, that's a good time to check the fence and everything else, wipe all of that stuff down, because you can see you get little spots of the stuff on the fence, so you want to take a paper towel and wipe that up too. Now, just like with a car, I'm just going to give this a second. A lot of times it helps if you fan it. And we're waiting for this to get that kind of matte finish look to it. You know, so it's not wet and liquidy and shiny anymore. But there's been numerous times where people have called me in the past wanting their planer fixed because boards are getting stuck in there and they say there's something wrong with the feed rollers or something. And I always tell them, wax the bed first, then call me back. And I mean, you'd be shocked, at least 70% of the time, that's the whole problem. Because the surface has got rust or whatever, they never wax it. I mean, if you go out into private world, they touch a machine when it doesn't work right. And until then, it never gets touched. I mean, I've seen table saws you wouldn't believe. And it's like, well, it runs in and cuts the board. It's like, well, yeah, okay. You know, but it's not looking so good anymore, and you could probably push a board through there probably a heck of a lot easier than the way it looks right now. So then all we have to do is just buff off the wax, just like on a car. And you can feel, as you're doing this, like right now there's still some wet spots. So as I'm going with the paper towel, it's catching in some spots, okay? So I'm gonna go with this, keep going over until this, I have no resistance. It's nice and smooth, okay?
I'm going to repeat the whole process or keep buffing it out?
Usually I just keep buffing it.
So don't add any more, just keep buffing it?
No,
Okay.
no. Because usually what happens is I'm taking off a little more excess now. Now it's gonna, whatever spots that were there are gonna harden, and we can get it done. Because when we do this, you have to remember we're putting on a lot more wax than we really need to. But it's nearly impossible to put on a tiny little thin layer and have it stick and buff off perfectly and have no problem. Now, if you live by the beach, maybe you want to do this twice, okay? Put this all on, buff it all off, give it 5 minutes, put on another coat, and buff that too, okay? So you have 2 coats of wax on there, 2 thin layers, because like, if you live by the beach, the air, it just does a number, okay? So now, I can feel there's no resistance on here when I'm pushing this paper towel. Okay? Now, if you're doing this in your own shop, I would wait a little bit longer than I wait. Okay, we're trying to get through this, but the longer you give this to, well, I shouldn't say it because there's a certain point where it's too hard to buff off, but if I walked away from this for 15 or 20 minutes, that's almost ideal, because now as much of it that can harden is going to harden, and the only thing that's left is the really excess stuff, okay? And so you're going to have a better coating on there.
Would you ever use a buffing machine?
You can.
Good.
You can. You know, typically what I run into for one table saw, it's just not worth the effort. But, you know, if it certainly is an option if you wanted to. You know, here I don't use it because they always have a habit of throwing some wax off on the floor, and we can't risk somebody slipping, you know, and cracking their head over or something. So I kind of stay away from it just because it makes me nervous. Now maybe if you run a shop and you have 4 employees working for you, maybe it makes you a little nervous too, you know. But in your own garage, you can kind of do as you please. It's, you know, you're living in your own bubble. And so, but basically, that's all there is to doing the cast iron tops. And that's the same with any machine out here that has a cast iron top. Okay? Do you have any questions on this? Does this seem pretty clear? Yes, Scott?
I apologize if you said this, but just for preventative maintenance, like say in a garage shop, roughly how often would you do this?
You know, if it's just a garage shop, usually I do it as needed, just when I see rust. But if, you know, if you're worried about it, once a month should be more than fine. Here I do it once a week.
Right.
Because especially in the summertime, people are hot and it's hot in here, and so you're sweating more. And so, you know, especially if you have the type of a shop where you have no AC or something like that, a cabinet shop or something, and people are working over this, they're dripping on it, well, that might be a little bit different. But in your own personal shop, once a month should be more than enough.
Okay.
Yeah. And it could be just wax once a month. I mean, if you don't see any rust on here, don't bother sanding it, just wax it.
Right.
Yeah.
For the fence,
Yes.
are you gonna talk about that later?
Yes, I will next week when we do the whole table side demo. Amy.
On the planer, the like the DeWalt is wax
Yes. now-
sufficient for that?
Yes, some planers, the DeWalt I think has stainless steel, but some of them have an aluminum bed, so you don't have to worry, just wax it. And it's the same with those DeWalts, they don't get rust very easy. I mean, I suppose if you were purposely trying to cause it, you could, but they're not prone to it. But most planers aren't, because the surface you're working with, we don't really touch with our hands a whole lot, but they do need to be waxed to make them work better. Sound good? Okay. Don't forget to grab a worksheet on your way out. They're up on that router table clock or something like that, and I'm starting to get coughing too much or something like that. Well, call it for the night. But, you know, I don't see any reason why we can't hopefully get through the whole thing. But there is a little room in bandsaw, but there isn't enough room to do a whole table saw lecture. So wanted to get that out of the way. Okay, if you haven't already, worksheet number 1, you could just drop off up here at the desk, and it is pretty much, well, at least old school thinking wise, that's pretty much the king of the shop. Okay, it's kind of the centerpiece. Today, we're starting to see a little bit more of a deviation from that, where particularly furniture shops a lot of times, some of them are going more towards trying to replace the table saw with the bandsaw, just because of today shop area is costing a fortune, so the smaller the footprint they can have, the better they're doing. They figure, well, we can kill 2 birds with 1 stone with 1 tool. Okay, we'll talk about that more on bandsaw next week. But in a lot of ways, especially in the cabinet shop, the table saw is still the most important, one of the most important tools they can have. The table saw really came about in England around 1838, 1840 or something like that. This little history part is not going to be on the worksheet, so you don't need to take notes. This is just to kind of set the ground for what we're going to be doing. So it was, that was basically where it was invented. Didn't have a whole lot of interest, really didn't take off. It was a very big machine, cumbersome, wasn't very well made, took a lot of maintenance, and it was difficult to operate. And so they kind of came to the determination that it was a lot easier to pay 4 extra people to use regular saws and planes and things like that, and they could get the job done better that way. We fast forward to post-Civil War United States around 1868 or so, is really when the table saw starts to become a staple in woodworking. And it's really pretty much the first real widespread powered woodworking tool we see in industry. Quite often they were water driven, and like the United States usually does, we tend to take something like a table saw idea that they did in the UK, and we made it cheaper to operate, smaller, and better. Okay? And one of the main driving forces of that is, of course, the United States is industrializing. We're rebuilding the South, and we're starting to actually export not just furniture, but lumber even. So it's speeding up production. Most of these are in mills that are running off of river power, basically water. Running a power wheel, water wheel, and there's a central shaft with belts coming down to individual table saws, and that's running the individual blades. We fast forward a little bit to the 1890s, the water wheel is replaced and a big gasoline engine is put on outside. And in this way they can move mills further away from the water. So if we have an unusual rain season or something like that, we don't have to worry about flooding the mill, things like that. And by this time gasoline engines are more reliable. They know they guaranteed a constant rate of horsepower. Same system still, central shaft running the individual tools. And then by the 19 teens is really when we start to see electric motors come in. And that's really when the table saw takes on a whole new life, because now in a way, even though it's very heavy, it is portable and it's self-contained. You don't need belts running down from the ceiling anymore. You don't have a central shaft to maintain. And it's a safer shop environment as well. And that continues until the 20s is really when we start to see the sales of the table saw start to slow down, and that's because of the skill saw comes in. And in the late teens, the skill saw's in mass production, and they have every attachment imaginable to help you replace a table saw with it, and it costs a lot less. It's small, it's portable, you can build a house with it, you can do whatever you want. And so the table saw is getting kind of quieter then until the 50s, early 50s, when Craftsman comes out with the contractor table saw. Now the table saw is small, 2 people can easily lift it and move it, and now you can find a contractor's table saw in the corner of almost every garage, even if they've never used it before. It came with the house. I mean, those things are all over the place. So since then, safe or not, I mean, some of those little contractors' table saws, especially from the 50s and 60s, depending on who built them or how they were made, are pretty radical to use. But since then, they're everywhere and they're going to stay everywhere. Okay? So that's what we're going to be talking about today. Okay. Yes, John?
You know how there's a movement towards battery-operated tools?
Yes.
Do table saws yet come with batteries?
Contractors' table saws are just beginning to. I think Skill is coming out with one with a 42-volt battery or something like that. And so that's going to become a thing. It won't become a thing in a shop, I don't think, because, you know, I mean, I can't say that. You know, 50 years, 80 years from now, I don't know what a battery will be able to do, you know. But currently, that's a long way out. Any sort of industrial equipment isn't going to be battery powered until a long time, if they ever do it, you know. It doesn't pay that much. I don't need that table saw to move, so it can be plugged in, hardwired into the wall, and we're done. So, but for a job site table saw, definitely, you know, it'll happen in the next 5 or 10 years. There'll be a lot of them.
But most of the ones that you see in a shop are 220 volt?
These ones here, yeah, most of them are. Yeah. In fact, all of them are in this building. Yeah.
All table saws.
Yes.
They're all
Okay.
saw stops?
What's that?
They're all saw stops here?
In here they are, yes.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. So, oh, by the way, I did bring in most of the books from the syllabus, so you're free to come up and look at these anytime you want to during the break or whatever. We're going to walk over to WD12, the wood turning room where the student storage is, and that's where we're going to look at the table saws. Okay?
Is this the syllabus or is there another?
Obviously, I can use them like this. Okay? So, the first thing with table saws is there's two basic types of table saw. Okay? What we have here are examples of a cabinet style table saw, and over there is a contractor style table saw. Okay? So now, the cabinet style table saw is the one that's been around basically from the beginning. Okay? It's basically a stationary tool. Okay? The contractor's table saw is the one that's come about since the 50s. Okay? It's considered a portable, although some of them are pretty heavy, but they are considered a portable table saw. Job site table saw. They come in all different sizes. Okay? The main difference that we're talking about with a cabinet style table saw, all of the works of the saw are held by the cabinet. Okay? They are fastened to the cabinet. With a contractor's style table saw, all of the works of the saw are fastened to the top. Okay? So when we think about that, okay, in a cabinet style table or in a contractor style table saw, you have the top of the saw, okay, and then you have the motor and all of the works inside of there are connected by bolts into the top of it. Okay, so like here, I can unbolt the top and just take it off. Everything's still here. On that, if I unbolt that top from the sides of the base of it, and I lift, the whole works are going to come out with that top. Okay? Now, the main reason that's important is going to be when we're aligning this. When we align the blade to set up the fence and everything else. We need to know that. Because when we're aligning something like this, we're going to be moving the tabletop. When we're aligning that, we're going to be loosening these bolts and moving the whole works from underneath. They're hanging on the top. It's space saving and weight saving, but it's trickier. Okay, this is a fairly easy system. Okay.
So what about with hybrid?
Okay, now the hybrid is a contractor's table saw where they take the cabinet all the way to the floor.
Okay. But
Okay.
it's the same setup.
It's the same setup. What they basically do, typically a contractor's table saw has an open base. It's just almost like a table. It's just wide open. What they do is instead they enclose the whole base, and it gives you the illusion of having a cabinet style table saw. Okay. In the same way, a sliding table saw is a cabinet style table saw with a sliding table attached. Okay, so those are kind of variations on the main base.
So
Okay?
same thing with multi-function machine, you know, like.
That's typically those are a cabinet base.
Oh,
Yeah.
mhm.
It depends though, because kind of the sky's the limit with that type of stuff.
Yeah, European style.
Yes, yes. So,
What do you need a slider for? Is this for cabinet making?
yeah, typically,
Plywood?
a lot of times you would use that for stuff that's pretty hard to handle single-handedly. You know, a slider would be, you know, in a shop, especially a single-person shop, you're building a bunch of cabinets. It's very hard for one person to be ripping plywood all day. You know, after a few sheets, you're starting to feel it. Okay. Okay. So, the main parts of a table saw, or the operating functions of a table saw, really aren't that different between the two, okay? So we have raise and lower, and blade tilt, power, okay? Now, there's a few variations on that. The Delta Unisaw has two wheels in the front. One is a tilt and one is a raise and lower. I don't know why they did that. It's like switching the brake and gas pedal in a car. It's just asking for a problem. But in most cases, the side wheel is tilt, and the front wheel is raise and lower. Same thing with most contractors' table saws. Sometimes to save space, they have like a little catch release in the front where you can tilt the blade or something like that. But a lot of the higher quality ones, you still have two wheels a lot of times. Okay, this one doesn't. This one's got one of those little pop things in the front to release it. It's, you know, it's a rigid. It's not a high-end one. Yes, John.
Aside from weight, is there any reason why you would never take a cabinet style one on a job? Is it just the electric, the power source?
But yeah, typically, there's a couple of reasons. Number one, it's heavy. Number two, power source. And number three, they're very top heavy. And if you're moving these often, the odds of it tipping are pretty high. Okay.
Do you really get that much of their cut? Job
Well,
site?
that's the thing. With a job site table saw, if you buy a decent one, they're very good saws. I mean, there's no reason why you shouldn't buy one. If your budget is, you know, says I need to buy a contractor's table saw, that's fine. I mean, as long as you buy a decent one, they're perfectly good. And the same is true of a cabinet style saw. I mean, you can buy a crappy one. I mean, a Grizzly one's, you know, it'll do the job, but there's issues with them, and you got to be very careful with them because their castings are very thin, you know, and you can't break them. I mean, out of the box, it'll work pretty nice, but you got to treat them nice.
Do they get out of alignment? My table saw never really gets out of alignment. Do they?
It depends. Well, here they don't. The saw stops are pretty
Yeah,
stable system, but if you have a cheaper one, they
Move it
can.
around a lot.
Yeah. Okay. So with the typically, well, let's talk about it. So how these table saws work? Okay, one of the reasons I have both of these here is because this Powermatic is a very traditional cabinet style table saw. Okay, and this is how, you know, 85% of cabinet style saws are going to work. Okay, the saw stop is a very different animal inside. Okay, so we're going to talk about the Powermatic first. And now how this works is we have, okay, now my ability to draw is horrible, so we are going to do the best that I can do here.
That's a fried egg.
Yeah,
I believe you
yeah.
said we could do it.
No, I know, I'm trying to here, believe me. Let's see here, so we got,
Like a fried egg from here.
I know,
Oh.
I know it does. Okay,
He'll take your names later.
that's right, yeah. That's right. I heard Nick's voice somewhere, yeah. Somebody just got a B, you wanna go for lower?
Is that the blade? The fried egg is the blade?
Yes, the fried egg is the blade.
Okay.
Oh,
Okay,
you just dropped to a C.
yeah, that's right, yeah.
I'm not the one.
Yeah, was that Scott again? Yeah,
He
yeah.
started it.
Okay, so, how this works inside here. Up at the front, there's a pivot point here, okay? And there is a worm gear underneath this carriage, okay? As I turn, okay, so this worm is driven by that front handle, okay? As I turn that, it's going to rotate this up and down on that pivot point, okay? So that's how we are raising and lowering the blade on here. Does that make sense to everybody?
Not really.
Okay, so
Can you show us just this right,
Yes.
this part right here?
that's the one to tilt it.
Okay.
Okay, so as I turn this, it's going to be rotating on this central point, and that's what's going to bring it
I see.
up and down,
That's what's moving it, yeah.
okay?
Are they all belt driven, like that one?
Okay, so this is a.
That's the pivot point, yeah. Most of them are, yes. Okay,
So I had a saw before that wouldn't go up and down anymore. Was that because it's just not lubricating?
there's a couple of things that can happen. Number one, if you don't know the life of the saw, what can happen is these teeth and that gear get bumped out of alignment if it ever fell over.
It's pushing against that thing and making it.
The other thing that can happen is there's grease on that, in those teeth. If that saw hasn't been used in a long, long time, grease turns into a rock. So you have to get in there with a brass brush and get it out. Okay?
handle, you can see it.
So now, what those parts, okay, so we have a worm gear underneath that's driving this system up and down, okay? These teeth here that worm is riding on is called a toothed trunnion, toothed like teeth,
Okay.
okay? Now, if you read really old books, they're gonna call it a rack, okay? Inside of these table saws, you have two kinds of trunnions. You have that toothed trunnion underneath and in the front. There's two of them.
Right.
One that raises and lowers and one that tilts it. They work the same way. And then two smooth trunnions in the front and the back.
Oh.
And that is what it rides on when we're tilting the blade. Okay, so if I go to tilt this thing,
What's a trunnion?
I'll show you in just a second. It's going to ride on these trunnions.
But that's not a smooth trunnion.
No, up here.
It's up here.
He's talking up here.
Yeah, the one you're looking at is the toothed one down below.
What he's just talking.
So these are the two for the tilting.
Yes.
The first two were,
The,
For the
for
up and down?
raising, for,
both of those are up and down.
You see that?
Right?
no,
No.
no. The one underneath is for up and down. The one in the front is what's driving the tilt. It's just sliding on these smooth ones.
So the smooth ones are the pivot point, and the gear one. raises-
Yes, they're the pivoting point for the tilting of the blade.
I'm still having a hard time with geometry on the worm.
Yes.
gear.
Worm gears there. You can
So
really
there's
see
a
it right
worm
there.
gear underneath. Can you see that down there?
Yeah, I can understand it for
Okay.
curving because it doesn't move, but for going up and down.
Yeah, so if we, then, there you go. So it's running underneath here,
gotta
okay,
lay
you
on your
can't
back to
really
see
see
that
it.
one.
Yeah.
And it's riding up and down on that central point.
But it would seem something, why am I not getting?
I think it's catching a.
You're not seeing it, it's underneath.
Oh, it must be a circular one.
Right.
Oh,
So it's connecting with it.
Can you see it better from here?
But you gotta be underneath there.
There's the,
So you're
The
moving the whole
smooth-
motor.
Yeah.
Smooth trunnion.
And the ones down below with the teeth on them is a toothed
so they're a
trunnion.
driving device.
Yes, absolutely. Okay,
So now with say contractor saw, do they have both of these or they
a
just have?
contractor saw can have anything,
Uh-huh.
because you don't know.
Oh.
If it's an old, well-made, heavy-duty one, it will have everything that's in this Powermatic, just on a smaller scale.
Okay.
And a lot of times it's made out of just steel instead of cast iron, okay? But if it's like that thing over there, that thing over there just has a bunch of plastic stuff that rides up and down. I mean, it's when we're using a table saw like this for the maintenance of it, okay? What we wanna do is blow these out often with just compressed air, okay? Usually, I don't take the top off unless there's something broken, okay? Because there's
It's a pain to
typically,
reset it, right?
well, yeah, there's that, but typically we have a side table, we have an end table, there's all this stuff we have to take out, but we have to tear apart our whole shop. So, to do the maintenance on this, in theory, ideally, we would take the top off. But I wouldn't unless there's something broken. Or you can't get it to do one of these functions. It won't tilt, it won't raise or something, and you have to actually get in there and find out
Blow it
why.
out every-
But I would blow it out often.
How often is it?
You
It's
know,
messy.
if it's your own personal garage, I would just blow it out after you use it real quick. Open up the throat plate, open up the side door, and blow it out. Okay? I mean, you don't have to do a massive, thorough job. Just, you
So
know.
you're never concerned with blowing into something you don't want it into?
I don't.
Okay.
Yeah. I mean, some people will talk about that online. It's never been a problem for me. It's been more of a problem if I don't, and it gets impacted in more and more because I'm not getting enough out.
So my contractor goes, folds down, so I can just go underneath it.
You could,
Use
or
the
just
compressor.
open up the throat plate and blow it out. You know, it doesn't have to be we're talking about just after I use it, if I wanna just get it good to go. If I say this is my Saturday to do maintenance on the table saw, then I'm gonna tip it over and blow it out real good. And I'm gonna look at these if I can see them or get at them in any way and take a brass brush and try and brush them. Because what happens is we get sawdust in here and then it gets ground in by friction of these gears working,
You
okay?
can tell though, right? I mean, you don't have to go see it. You can tell when you're using it.
Yeah, you can certainly feel it,
Yeah,
feel the action.
Yeah.
I've got a contractor saw, and sometimes when I raise it, it squeaks, so that's again, that just lubrication.
Yes.
And you wouldn't use dry lubrication, you would use.
Now, almost all manuals recommend dry lubrication, but the problem with dry lubrication is it doesn't last very long, and depending on like out here in this shop, it'll last 2 days, okay? So what I will do, almost always, any situation where I have gearing, where I have parts coming together that are grinding on each other, not sliding, we have two gears that are meshing together, I'm going to use white lithium grease, okay? And then anything that slides, like these smooth trunnions up on top, where I have two metal surfaces sliding, I'm going to use a light machine oil, which is just 3-in-1 oil, okay? That's going to take care of the squeaking problem, the grease will on that gear, okay? So
it's the gear that's squeaking, it's not.
most likely it's this gear here is dry.
Is it the oil what causes the problems? The dust collects with it?
Well, see, that's the
Trade-off?
the trade-off to it.
Okay.
Now, if you use dry lubricant, you don't have that problem
Right.
as much, but you have to do it all the time. If you leave this off for very long, it dries off and it actually flakes off. Okay, so dry lubricant is something like Bow Shield. You spray it on wet, and it dries into a lubricating powder. Okay. They use that stuff a lot in like old Victrolas and things like that because you're not going to open them up often and you don't want them to attract any dirt and dust inside. Okay? Now,
Is graphite a dry lubricant?
what's that?
Is graphite a dry
It
lubricant?
usually is, yes. In most cases, it's for locks and you don't want dust or anything inside of a lock, so it's typically a dry lubricant, yeah.
Last week you went over cleaning, steel top, what's this, like aluminum?
Yeah, I just put wax on it.
Just wax.
Yep. So now when we do that, okay, we gotta first blow it out good, okay, clean any of these gears that we have to with a brass brush. Make sure that we don't have a bunch of dirt in there, because if we apply grease or we apply oil, we're just gonna bind it in, okay? So make sure it's clean, put on the lubricants that you need, and then we're done. Now, one thing I will say about grease, one thing to always remember about that, is it's not something that's gonna sit. Grease needs to be worked. So if we put grease on this and then I don't touch this thing for 6 months, grease will turn hard and it's gonna jam up these gears. Okay, so that's just something to remember it's gonna sit there for a month, no problem. But it will turn hard, okay?
Hard or just?
Pretty hard. I mean, you'll have to go in here with like a dental pick
You will.
and pick it out.
Oh.
Yeah, okay?
Is there any chemical to break that, or you have to manually?
Well, acetone will help break it down. It's hard to, the problem is in most cases of the table saw, you're fighting gravity to get the acetone or something on there and to keep it on. Okay, usually when we use acetone, it wants to soak on something. Okay?
And you're talking lithium grease,
Yes.
still, okay.
So you said, you said grease on the, like, the worm drive and the tooth.
Drive.
Yes, anything where you have a lot of basically metals grinding together where it's gonna build a lot of friction. Where you have smooth metals sliding, that's where we use oil. Okay? Now, with the saw stop, we have a sort of a different situation inside here. One thing I will say about saw stops, they are extremely dust sensitive. Okay? This monster will eat dust all day, it doesn't care. If I don't have a dust collector on this, it's only my health that's gonna suffer. This thing will not, it doesn't care, okay? These are tough to the max, okay? I mean, I'm gonna give you my personal opinion here. The Powermatic 66 is the best table saw ever made.
That's
I
a
mean,
66.
yes, it is a bulletproof, tough saw. It is a good saw, okay? They don't make it anymore, but if I'm gonna say the greatest table saw ever made, that's it, and the saw stop would be a second. Now, Delta Unisaw is good, there's a lot of good saws out there, but this thing is a monster, okay? I love that almost as much as I love old skill saws.
And this is only close because it has the safety feature?
Well, this is
Or
very
table saw?
close because it's very well made.
Okay.
I mean, it's a very well made saw, but it's machined incredibly well, but it is complex in its design, and because of its complex, it's a little bit delicate. Okay, so this raises and lowers and works a lot like a router lift. We have a post in the back, a big post in the front, and then a worm gear here that drives it up and down. Okay, so it's a little easier to understand. Now for tilting, it works the same as our Powermatic. It's got two smooth trunnions, and then the wheel in the front drives it to tilt it.
But everything happens on these two, right?
Yes, yes. That's the top of the back shaft right there, and there's the main one in the front.
There's also belt driven, huh?
Yes.
So are all the modern ones even belt driven?
Most cabinet style table saws are belt driven. Okay. The contractor style table saws, most modern ones are direct drive, just because we can get so much out of such a small motor and just cram it in there. The old ones tend to be belt driven.
So when this thing drops, if you accidentally, what drops? I mean,
Oh, that's why
your brake
it
comes
can't be
on.
Feature?
Yeah,
Oh, yeah,
That's why it
that-
can't be on a worm drive.
Oh,
It
that's
has
a
to go to-
major pain. I've done it
Yes.
Oh, the
Yeah.
cartridge goes into the blade.
That makes sense.
Cartridge goes in the
Yeah,
blade,
so
but
it's
then it
gonna
drops.
slide down the two shafts.
All goes down, both of them at the
Slides
same
down.
time.
Yes.
And that makes so much sense. I was like, well, why would I make it
Goes
different?
right into the curve.
Because they want it to go down.
Yeah.
And then it's-
And
the
slide down
worm-
easily.
The worm drive's in the way. That can't go down at all.
Has that been triggered quite often here? or-
Yes. Yeah.
Yeah, it depends on the semesters, oddly.
The first.
It's usually it's like a hidden nail or a staple or something. You're
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. Or sometimes
Aluminum
it's wet.
miter.
Okay, so this works very similar to a router lift. Okay, it's simple in that way. So on these two shafts, which you can get to from the main door, okay, and from the side door, we're just going to use 3-in-1 oil. That's one case where too the dry lubricant does seem to work pretty good on those. And then that Acme worm gear up front is where we're going to put the white lithium grease. Okay.
You get that anywhere?
Oh yeah, absolutely.
Can you get like smaller, like a squeeze tube, since I don't,
I think you can at Home Depot.
oh, okay, good.
Yeah.
Do you lubricate these at all?
The shafts here?
Shafts?
Yes. Those are where I'll use the 3-in-1 oil, or maybe the dry lubricant will work too. And the same thing with the trunnions in the back and the front.
Where's the second track?
It's just the top of
okay.
it there. Yeah, you can see it from the side door. You can see it goes
Okay.
all the way down.
And you lube these as well.
Yes, with just the 3-in-1
How
oil.
can you get this though without
moving the
taking off
top,
the
huh?
top?
You really can't. I mean, typically what I would do is if you have to take the top off, that's when you do it. But just try and blow air up there for the most part.
In my shop, I have I have this and haven't lubed it for 7 years.
No, well, that's the other thing too, is if you
Yeah.
have to,
Yeah.
you can get at these with the little red straw and a WD-40 can. So
Okay.
that's good enough to
Underneath.
pass. But you gotta make sure you
Rub it
blow
out,
it out
rub it.
Real low,
before you
okay.
do that. Okay? Now, the problem with these is there is a lot of flat surfaces in there for sawdust to collect on them. That's why they're very dust sensitive. This one has none of that. The sawdust just falls on the floor. If
that's
you
the difference,
have
okay.
a saw stop, you really, really, really want to have some sort of dust collection for it. Minimum a good shop vac, okay? But it'd be nice if you have one of those, single stage dust collectors of some sort that's dedicated to the saw, or something where you have a blast gate to other machines you can turn off so it gets the full amount. Because it uses serpentine belts instead of V belts. Okay, now a serpentine belt has a very flat surface. Okay, so sawdust will collect inside of there, and it's getting jammed into the belt as we're using it. Now SawStop uses those because they last longer, they grip better, and they're stronger. Okay, so they're gonna stick with these. That's why they choose to do that over the V belts. Now the V belts that we have in most table saws, they last a long time too, but they're also very cheap and easy to replace. Okay. Now in any of these cases, when we have to replace a belt, okay, there's two real consumables that are that we have inside of a table saw. Okay, that's the arbor bearing and the belts. Okay. Now these belts, typically, when we replace those, in the case of the Powermatic, there's several bolts here that hold this motor, and we release the 4 bolts, and it allows us to move the motor closer or further from the pulley that drives the arbor. Okay. Now with the Powermatic, or with the SawStop, there is a motor. The motor in there has a bolt on the top and a bolt on the bottom. You can release it and have a pivot point. That's pretty typical. The Powermatic's a little more heavy duty built. What's very typical is to have a release in the bottom and a pivot point for the motor. Now I can take the slack off of the belt, slip the belt off the pulleys, take it wherever I want to take it, and say, give me another one of these, put the new ones on. Okay?
I don't know what they're called. They're like these red belts that are linked, I think?
Yes, the link
belts. Are
belts.
they good for table saws? Or?
Are
they good, period? Or?
They are in the belt video, but I am not a big fan of those because they don't last as long.
Okay.
They tend to kind of come apart easier. But the plus to them is you can make them any size you need them. So if you have a production shop that can't go down for an hour, those link belts are kind of nice, because now I can throw it on there while I order the proper belt. And it doesn't matter if it's a table saw, the drill press, anything can break because I can take out the links to make it fit. So, yes?
What's the average life of a belt?
For a table saw,
At least 5 years.
yeah, I would say probably 5 to 10 years. Yeah, because I mean, the SawStop are gonna last probably at least 10 years because that's a serpentine belt. They last a lot longer. That's what's in your car. I mean, they use serpentine belts because they're very, very tough. But the V belts in most table saws that you'll see, I think that the Unisaw has 3. They usually, I know I replaced mine on my Unisaw. I think I had them for 7 years when I replaced them, and they were still running. It was just when I was doing the maintenance, I thought they looked kind of rough, and I don't want them to break. I just replaced them. Yeah. Okay.
So the serpentine ones you were saying earlier get dust in them?
They can, yes. That's
one of the problems with them?
Yes, because see, a V belt is shaped like this, so the dust just falls off of them while you're working. With serpentine belts, the dust can fall on the flat surface of the belt. The serpentine belt doesn't look that different than the belt on your pants. I mean, it's just, it's a flat piece of rubber that has a whole bunch of fibers inside of them and little grooves on them to grip the pulleys. And so all of those little grooves are in a nice flat 1-inch wide surface. And there's nothing really to make dust want to fall off. Okay? And so when they fall inside, then they just get mashed into the gears and run around, and they'll slowly wear on the gears. Now, because we're cutting wood, it's not as big of a problem. But when you use a saw stop in bypass mode to cut brass or something like that, if brass or any sort of aluminum or something gets onto that, it's gonna tear that belt up slowly.
You said brass, I thought I heard grass.
Oh,
Yeah,
that's right.
You're mowing along with this thing
Yeah,
too?
that's right, yeah. But, you know, and we've used this Powermatic quite a bit to cut aluminum for different classes and things like that. And it'll just fall right off V-belts, it's not a problem. It embeds in serpentine belts, and slowly, every time it makes that curve, it's cutting a little more and wearing into it a little bit more, and then eventually you have a
Don't do it
failure.
on your table, on your saw stop.
Yeah, yeah.
So
Okay.
with a contractor saw, if you cut, like sheet metal or aluminum, you should be cleaning that out ASAP.
Well, you should do that with any saw if you cut metal, for sure, okay? But with, it's less likely to be a problem with a contractor's table saw because most of them are direct drive and there's no belt to even be involved, okay?
You don't have
Most
to
of the
worry-
modern ones.
Yeah, but you still have couplings and.
Yeah, so,
all that
I
stuff.
mean-
You have to worry about it getting in there.
Pretty much any woodworking tool, you should blow it out right after you cut metal. Okay, that's not something you wanna leave in. And if, I mean, it's one of those tools where it will do the job, but it's not ideal to do the job. So we're gonna do it, you know, okay, I need to cut these 2 parts, okay, I'll use it. But that's about it.
Usually change the blade or?
Yes,
You did.
yes, or I mean, I would
Metal
use it,
cutting.
yeah, for sure.
So, for lubrication, especially those parts that are hard to reach, like once you take the top off, how come there's no like lubricating holes or something like that, through the top where you could just drop it in? Like
Yeah.
my sewing machine has like
Sam didn't
20
design
holes
it.
that you
Yeah,
just drop
yeah.
it in and.
I think the thing is they figure
Drop it in as much.
there's a
Work to
slight
get in there.
possibility, I mean, with a lot of work, you can get it. I mean,
Yeah.
you know, if I crawl all the way around and get inside of here as best I
Yeah.
can and get up there, I can do it. And I
Okay.
think their feeling is, I'm not gonna spend another $50 in machining. You
Yeah,
know, that's
okay.
good enough.
Maybe you see it on older tools or something.
You do see it on some older tools,
Yeah,
yes.
okay.
Okay? So the other thing that's likely, or is not likely, but your other consumable on a table saw is the arbor bearing. Okay? So inside the body of these table saws, there is a bearing that the arbor spins in. Okay? So we have an arbor that runs through here that we have our blade mounted to. And inside the housing that's next to that arbor is, usually it's 2 bearings side by side. Okay? And then there's a pulley on the end of the arbor that runs to the motor. Now typically it depends on the style of saw. Most of them, it's fairly easy to replace the arbor because that's one of the most common failure points. I mean, if you have one for a long time in a cabinet style shop, it's gonna eventually fail because you're using it all the time. So in the case of like this Powermatic, if I take the blade off of here, okay, and I release the motor, take the belts off of the pulley, okay, the pulley's held on with a set screw, okay, so there's a screw inside of one of these grooves we can't see because the belts are here, that pushes against the shaft, and that's what holds that pulley on there. I release that set screw, I take that pulley off, there's another set screw in this housing that pushes down on a little bar that keeps pressure on
Arbor.
these arbor bearings, okay? If I release that, okay, there's one other little clip inside of here just to keep that shaft from sliding out of the inside of the bearing. Those slide right out, okay? Now, there's a lot of times because of dirt and dust and things like that, they need a little bit of persuasion where you could take a, you know, you can use as long as it's rubber,
Yeah.
or I like to just take a block of wood that's long enough to come out the side here and just tap. But we want to tap lightly and gently on these, and you'll see them start to just slowly move. We don't want to get them out in one whack, okay? Because again, this whole body here is cast iron, and cast iron is fragile, you know? Okay, so that's, you know, with these table saws, we use cast iron for a couple of reasons. Well, of course, first of all, it's cheap. Number 2, it adds a lot of weight, okay? We can cast it instead of machine it, okay? So with cast iron, we are pouring it into a mold, usually a sand mold, okay, letting it cool, then we're taking it out and we're putting it in the machine. I'm not paying a bunch of people to machine this whole part. They're gonna machine a few surfaces that are critical surfaces, but for the most part, we're just getting a cast iron, roughly shaped chunk, and that's all it has to be. If I take and mic every part of this cast iron body, it won't match the next 66. They're all slightly different because it's just a cast piece that's main job is to provide structure and weight, and then they're also, cast iron is air cooled in a sand mold typically, and because of that it has a fairly porous structure inside the metal itself. So if I take a piece of this and I bash it with a hammer and bust it open, it's almost like sand inside. Okay, it has a porous structure to it, and it's very, very vibration absorbing material. Okay, so that's another reason why it's used a lot in table saws and in almost most of our higher end woodworking machinery. It's a very absorbing material of vibration. Okay, you won't see that in contractors' table saws because they're willing to trade off vibration for lightness. You know, you use a contractor's table saw, a lot of times you say, well, it's going to vibrate more than a cabinet style saw would, but it also weighs, you know, usually 70% less. I mean, they weigh a lot less.
How much does this weigh compared to that?
Actually, the saw stop is a little bit heavier. I think the saw stop is around 450 or something like that, and the Powermatic's about 300.
Including the top, or without the top?
No, with the top. Yeah, yeah. Now, one thing to remember about these now, if one of these, if we're buying one used, okay, the main thing I am looking at is this cast iron body. Okay, when you're going to buy one of these, if I see one on Craigslist or whatever, now most of them won't say, sure, take the top off, but open up the door, get in there with a flashlight, and look at this cast iron body. Because that's the most likely, I will say, irretrievable failure in a table saw. Yes. If they have knocked this thing over at some point and stood it back up, it's conceivable that this thing will still raise and lower fine, okay, and it will still look good, and it's not. You get it home, the truck ride, you start to use it, it's gonna let go, okay. And sometimes you'll see where the crack isn't all the way through. You have a noticeable crack, but it hasn't given up yet. But when it does, you're done.
Can you tap it and hear if there's a crack?
Well, you might be able to.
Okay.
Or you could make it break.
Well, like the way that you check like your angle grinder wheel.
Yeah,
you know,
I'm not sure if you could, because the way the rack is held in there, it's kind of under a lot of tension. So I'm not sure if you would necessarily hear it.
Okay.
And you're talking about the whole thing, not just the bearing.
No, I'm talking about, yes, this whole body of it.
Right.
Okay. Now that's where the saw stop is a little bit. This Powermatic is one of the only table saws I know of that has a better than 50% chance of surviving being tipped over. Okay. There's a huge amount of weight in there, and everything is held together with cast iron, which is fairly soft. Okay. If this thing goes over, it has a better than 50% chance that I can stand it back up and realign the table, and it's going to go. This thing will destroy itself. Okay? I mean, these are very delicate. And almost any table saw, a Unisaw, a Grizzly, almost anything has a less than 50% chance of surviving a toppling over.
Is it just because of the sheet metal as opposed to the cast iron?
It's because of the amount of cast iron. This thing has so much. I mean, it's just, everything on it is so heavily built.
It's overbuilt, man. But
it's to the max.
But it's lighter than this one.
It is a little bit lighter, yeah. This one has
150 pounds, right?
Yeah. This one has a bigger motor, but it also has a thicker, heavier top.
Right.
Okay.
Yeah, because
Fall over easier.
my unisaw is about 700 pounds. That's an unusual environment.
Yeah, yeah.
So if you crack, if you want to get an electric motor, you can use any electric motor,
You can't do that, no.
and if you crack the housing.
If you crack the housing, you're done. Electric motor is not the end of the world. You can probably find an electric motor for it. You know, it may not be this exact ball door motor, but you can find a motor that will mount. But if you crack this housing, yeah, that's not a table saw anymore. And you know, at that point, you have to buy another 66 to fix this problem. So you might as well just get another 66.
Wow.
Are there that many out there on the market right now?
There's one.
These? Oh yeah.
There's one on offer up for $750 right now.
Yeah, yeah. See, yeah, that's not a bad price either. But
What years were they made?
these, oh, they were made from the '60s right up until probably 2005 or somewhere around
The
there.
one on offer up is the dark green, which is 60s, right?
Yeah, yeah, that's older than the gold.
Because that's like 70s.
Yeah,
So how much do you charge to check one out?
yeah, yeah, yeah.
All
I-
in here.
You also got to get it from Chino back.
Sauce that's important to remember is that the quality of the blade does make a huge difference when we are cutting also. So people can tell, I'll hear that all the time, I got a really nice table saw but I get terrible cuts. A lot of times, if everything's set up nicely, it's just a poor or dull blade, okay? So we want to bear in mind to make sure that we're taking, it's worth the extra to buy a high quality blade and to buy a blade for what we're going to be using. You know, we have blades for ripping, cross-cutting, combination blades. So you want to be careful and to think about what kind of blade is going to be best for your shop. A multi-purpose shop usually just get a combination blade. Okay.
Do you reset this cartridge every time you change? I know what Dago blades do, but because I don't know if the blades are exactly the same, you know, the distance. between
Yeah,
that
yeah.
thing,
You need
that
to at
little
least
yellow thing?
you do need to at least check
Okay.
and make sure. Okay.
Is that a big deal to be really precise on that? Or-
I haven't
distance
found it
from
to
it,
be
distance?
about the thickness
It
of
says
it.
it, but I.
About the thickness of a nickel seems to work,
Yeah.
but it could be the thickness of a penny. It seems to work there too. Yeah. The only thing you don't want to be is a hair from touching it. You know, you don't want it to be, you know, right there, but not touching it. Okay, that's the only time where you could have a problem. Okay.
And the problem would be it would fire too early.
Supposedly it can, according to their manual and what I've heard online, when they have a trigger, when there was no cause for it that they could find, a lot of times it's because the cartridge was right there, super close to touching the blade.
You can imagine just a vibration could catch it.
Something, who knows? Yeah.
You know, go back to the blade. What brand do you recommend?
Typically, Klingspor, those are the ones we use right here. Klingspor makes a good, very affordable general purpose blade.
Queens for?
Klingspor, K-L-I-N-G.
The sanding
Like
paint.
the sand.
Yeah, S-P-O-R. Okay.
50, well, how many teeth for a combo would you recommend?
I think those are usually,
40, right?
yeah, I think they're 40 or 42, something like that.
The company Powermatic is still making them, or you're just saying the older ones are better?
Powermatic makes a new model. It's called the 2000, which is a good saw. It's not as good as a saw stop, and it's not as good as a 66, but they don't make the 66 model anymore. Okay.
If it's your favorite, is there a reason why you have a unisaw and not a 66?
Because I could buy one. You know, the Unisaw was
It's just what
cheap
you could
and
find at the time?
yeah, it was reasonable. And the Unisaw is a great saw.
Yeah.
But if I was going to have a saw that's going to be,
If you're going to start over, you'd try to find a 66?
I probably would. I mean, to me, I would say this is the best table saw. Am I going to kill myself if I get a good deal on a, you know, to me it was a good deal at the time, so I took it. It was easier, you know, $350 for a nice Unisaw was worth it to me instead of $750 for a 66, you know. You know, I can sleep.
Yeah.
You know. Okay. So let's see here. I think we're looking pretty good. There's a couple of other quick little things just to remember. Making sure that these lock knobs up here are free when we're raising and lowering. Okay. Because how that works is that screws in and it has a point on it. And that point goes into two soft metal pieces and it spreads them apart. And it spreads them apart against the housing that those shafts turn in. Okay, and that's what locks it. And so if we trying to run that thing up and down when it's locked, we start to wear into the housing. Okay, so be wary of that. For some reason here, a lot of times after people clean them, they lock them. I don't know why. Don't do that. You know, the only time I would ever lock that is if I have a dado set on here and I'm making tenons and I just got it to the perfect setting and I don't want it to move. Okay.
That's what it might do. If you don't want
it might.
It might. But
And
you're
even
saying it really
then,
But it
could.
might not too.
But just
but-
a day eventually, huh?
but there's almost no reason other than that to lock that thing.
Yeah, that's good.
Okay.
Don't worry about
Okay,
it.
so you can make a cut with it on lock, no problem.
Oh yeah,
Ah,
absolutely. Yeah, you don't have to lock it to rip a board.
that's funny.
Yeah.
Is there
Belts.
never backlash in that?
It depends on the brand. On most table saws there isn't because it's an immediate reaction of pushing against the surface, and it's pushing top and bottom, so there's not like a push back situation.
Right.
John, there's two belts in here. Depending on the quality of the saw, there'll be 1, 2, or 3 belts a lot of times, and it's just for better delivery of power. Okay, 2 belts will slip less than 1 belt. Okay, and it's sort of the reason why there's a serpentine belt in there. It's going to grip better than 2 of these. Okay. Okay. A couple of other one other thing to consider with these two inside here. One of the reasons we blow them out is because there's hard stop limits inside of these table saws. Okay, so when we tilt a table saw, that table saw tilts until it hits a limit. Okay, which should be 45. Okay, so you can see it pretty easily in the saw stuff. They're in the Powermatic. They're in the Powermatic too, but you can see them real good on the saw stuff because they paint the heads yellow. Okay, there's one there, one here, one here. Okay, all of those are there to stop that one right there.
This one too?
That's to move the blade cartridge up and down.
Oh, okay.
But like this one
Oh,
up
that
front
one, yeah,
here, that one there is going to stop at 90 degrees when we're tilting the blade. That's going to stop it when we hit 90, and we know we're at 90 again. Now, where those limiters are, there's prone to get dust buildup there. Okay, so when we go to 90 and it doesn't, it goes to 88 or something like that. Unfortunately, a lot of times, instead of thinking there's just dust there, we adjust that limiter. Okay, now at some point, I blow this out after work, go home, now it goes to 92.
Yeah.
Okay,
It's adjustable.
So you could actually change where it stops at?
yes, you can.
So you can make it go past 45 if you want.
You can. Well, I mean, not very far, but
But
you
you
can.
can get it there
Yes, you can.
if you wanted to play around
Oh,
with
I
it.
see.
Yeah.
Oh,
Yeah, they're less obvious on the Powermatic because they're just a bolt. They don't paint them.
Yeah, it's adjustable.
Yeah.
Yes. Okay.
Would you trust them even on your own saw? I mean, to be exact.
Out of the box, no. But once I adjust them and lock them, you can trust them for a long time.
How you dial
This one
it
right here.
in, way and be exactly 90, is that block thing that makes that?
No, what I do is I bring it to what I think 90 is. We're assuming we have the top on it.
Yeah.
Okay, bring it to 90. What I think 90 is, take my Starrett square and check it for 90.
You just go off on a square.
You can.
100%. But that's where it's important. It's a good idea to have a high quality square.
Now, if I remember, Carl
Yeah,
went
it's
a
nice
lot
to have
farther
it
than
integrated,
that.
huh?
What's that?
Carl went a lot farther than that. I just don't remember, I mean, he was,
Just the head spur?
he went to the fourth.
Well, it's Carl.
I mean, he was just ridiculous, but
Yeah, no,
but no, head square is good.
yeah, well, I mean, I can't imagine needing to be better than just a good square. I mean, it's wood. You know? Yeah, I can imagine that. Okay?
But
So when you
they
get
say
one
like-
out of the box and it's not 90 degrees, do you actually adjust these?
Yes, that would be the thing
How
to
do you
do.
do that without taking the top off?
You
What
can
do you
reach
adjust?
from inside. You can come through this door or the side door. Yeah.
So you get the blade at 90 and then you're adjusting, right?
Yes.
Yeah.
There's this one, and where's the other one?
There's one there, there's one here.
Oh, okay.
There's this one here, limits how high up it can go.
I
So
see.
other than dust, it won't necessarily get out at 90, right?
It shouldn't.
Not likely.
No, it's just this, okay, when I'm aligning it. When we're aligning a table saw, we're gonna do this after the break, but when we're aligning a table saw, we're aligning this blade to one of the miter slots, okay? Now, I can release this here and I can move it and lock it, okay? Now, if we're using a more traditional contractor's table saw, the bolts are underneath. So my access is terrible. And then what the manual will tell you is flip it over, move it, lock it, flip it back, test it. Flip it over. I mean, it's hell. And the other thing too is remember, we're flipping it over. Now I'm trying to remember, am I tapping it to the left or the right?
Yeah.
Where am I doing this? So with those, as much of a pain as it is, put it onto sawhorses, release it from underneath, and don't flip it, okay? Release it, try and get a hold of it from underneath and move it, test it, move it, test it, and then remember that now I have it where I want it. When I tighten it, it's gonna move, okay? So it's a lot of fun. I mean, it makes everything lighter and easier, but for alignment purposes, it makes it a lot more difficult. This one's a little bit nicer, although the manual on this one's kind of shocking to me because it tells you to loosen these, raise the blade all the way up, loosen these 4 bolts, and tap on the blade to move that carriage. Don't do that. Please don't ever do that. Okay?
So the alignment though, once you get it right, as long as you're not doing something crazy on the saw, it shouldn't be moving around,
That's
right?
true.
Is
I
that-
had a Powermatic for years, contractors. And you're free to look in either of these. Underneath the carriage of this, there's a worm gear under there that rides on a toothed trunnion. Okay, so there's one right down there you can see. Okay, and then there's one you really can't see, but it's underneath. Let's see here.
You can see it from the side right there.
Okay.
See it on the side?
Yeah, I guess it's right down in here.
Yeah.
Yeah, I don't know if you'll see it or not. Okay, on both of those, you want to use white lithium grease, okay?
And
Now-
what do you put the lithium grease on? The,
I just use an acid brush and just paint it onto...
on that worm thing?
Yeah,
Got
it
it.
doesn't need a lot, okay? For these belts here, typically the motor, either in this case, it releases with 4 bolts in this housing, okay? And now
These?
no,
No.
inside of here, you can see one here, and then there's one right there.
Okay.
And when you release those, I have movement in this motor, so I can add slack here, slip these belts off of the pulleys, and
Just push the motor back,
buy new. Yeah, you can.
tighten
In this case, you're going to pull it
it,
towards
or
you.
pull it.
Okay, and then remove those belts, put on the new belts, and then push this away. Okay, until these are tight, and then tighten those bolts back on. Now,
Just like in a corner.
That's
in
enough
the
pressure to be okay.
in most of them, there will be one pivot bolt on the outside and one tightening bolt down below, and this motor will swing on a pivot point. Okay,
The saw stop?
so it just kind of depends. The saw stop, the unisaw is also that way. Okay, the other thing now is these bearings inside of this housing. Okay, those are the arbor bearings. So now inside here, underneath these belts, on this pulley, there's a set screw inside of here. It's hard to see because the belts are covering it. Release that, the pulley slips off. Release this set screw and take the blade off first. And then the whole assembly slides out. Okay? Now I can take those bearings off, put the new bearings on, put it back together, retighten this, put the pulley back on, tighten the pulley.
And when you said when you take the bearings off, you tap it
Careful.
Yes.
There's also a clip.
Because
caliper clip
there is a
removal.
clip inside of here. Okay.
Yeah.
So that way we can take a piece of wood on the end here and gently tap it out. Okay. Don't use much force.
You put
Okay.
it back in. You put some grease and all in there.
And in these, no, there's no grease or
nothing
anything.
to
Just
go
put
on.
them back.
Okay. All right.
Yeah. Put everything
But
back.
don't get
together.
anything near this, right? Grease-wise.
No, not on the
You don't wanna
belts.
touch those belts.
No.
You don't put any kind of lubrication on the shaft?
No.
No.
Nope.
Okay.
Just put it back together.
Cool. Thank
Because they're
you.
not.
You bet.
Yeah.
Appreciate it.
Was someone asking a question? What's up? Oh, that's a good point. It will be in the bearing video, but typically there is a lot of noise in the wind down.
The gear he was showing us at first is right here. And you see it? It's on this this wheel. See, that wheel is controlled by this. And you'll be able to.
Just lightly, yeah. Perfect. Okay.
There's two on
And
there.
there should be one in each corner. I know, that's always the tough part.
There you go, got it. So you just want to put them in a few threads?
You can put them in just until they're touching the metal. So if that washer is starting to touch.
Okay.
And Greg, if you wouldn't mind just running the blade all the way up. Perfect. There we go, very good. Thank you. Okay, so now, when we are aligning this blade, what we're thinking about is having this blade perfectly parallel to our miter slot. Now, we can decide which miter slot, it doesn't matter that much. Preferably, if you're doing this at home, pick the miter slot that's the side your fence is on. Okay, because we're going to align the fence off of this one. It's a little easier. It's not the end of the world, because if we align this one to it, we drop it, we can still bring the fence all the way over. It's just a little bit easier. Our main goal, or our main reason for that is because we can define this position, okay? It's a solid point on a table saw top, okay? There's nothing adjustable about this. It is what it is, and it's a solid piece to us, okay? So with a contractor style table saw, with the cabinet style table saw, we already talked about the contractor one. We have to get underneath to move the motor. In this case, we're going to be moving this table, okay? So I'm going to be basically taking this and going in one direction or the other to align it with this blade, okay? Now, you see these a lot, okay? These are plates. They use these plates for getting these aligned, okay? It's supposed to be perfectly flat or whatever. I don't use these, okay? And there's a main reason I don't like them. Number one, almost any blade is flat enough, okay, first of all. And second of all, what I don't like with this is because with most table saws, like this one, and I think you can with the saw stop too, but most table saws, I can adjust this table so far, this throat plate will not go on here now. With that, it's too wide for me to have the throat plate in while I align this, okay? With this, with the blade in there, I can align that blade with the throat plate in. And now I can't run into that problem, okay?
Is that true of any of the cabinet style ones? that you
Yes,
work
that's how I would do it. I would do the same thing on the contractor one. I would always just use the blade because the amount of precision we're talking about is more than good enough for cutting wood, okay? Now, this plate here, I don't understand this at all, okay? For using it on a woodworking tool, this is overkill, and this thing, I guarantee you, is not flat enough to set up a machining tool for metal. So this is a gimmick, okay? It's people online trying to make money, as far as I'm concerned. Now, we can use this in here, and it may make the difference of 1/1000th of an inch, which I don't care about, okay? And if we're being conscious of it, we can make marks maybe on the table or something so that we know where the throat plate's gonna be or whatever, and try and work it with that plate, but I don't like to use that. And Carl used to use that in jigs and fixtures, and that's one of the only things I can honestly say I changed his mind on. I brought him around to this idea. The last 2
Well done.
classes, he did it this way, so now, if depending on the books, so if you were looking at any of the books in 12, the newer books are going to use a dial indicator, okay, to align this, to align the saw. Now, if you're using an old book is going to tell you to do it this way, okay? Now, if we use this method, there's 2 things to remember. Number 1, it's not as accurate, of course. And number 2, we have to be very careful with this, because when I put it into this miter slot, I can have it laying flush on the or flat on the table. I can have it up. There's a lot of stuff I can be doing here. So when I use this, I want to be consistent to the max with it, okay? Now, the reason I always like to show this, okay, I like this version because this is easy for me to see what I'm doing. But this tells you they've done it this way for probably 80 years, and it tells you this is overkill and probably unnecessary. Because they've been making really, really nice stuff for 100 years doing it this way, okay? So this is precision beyond what we need to do.
Thank you.
Okay? So, but I will say the nice thing about this, I can look at a number. I'm not trying to judge a gap or whatever, you know. So this is giving me a pretty easy thing to do as well. Okay. Now this little jig that holds this, there is the drawings for it on the on canvas in files. The only thing you have to be careful of is this groove, okay? Because the tang on these dial indicators aren't consistent. Okay, and you want it to fit fairly tight in here, because this bolt is going to squeeze it and hold it tight in here. So if I have a gap that's more than 1/16 of an inch, it's going to split this body when I tighten this bolt. Okay, so I mean, you can buy one of these for probably $30 at Rockler. They make this jig out of, you know, phenolic or something, but you can make it for, you know, $1.50. Okay, in a little bit of time. Now, same thing with the dial indicator. This is one of those things where a Harbor Freight $25 dial indicator is good enough. Okay, so don't buy a $150 Starrett for this. Okay, the one thing you do want to think about when you're buying one of these is you want to buy one. Okay, so you want one that's graduated in 1/1000ths of an inch. Okay. And that's going to be right on the face. It's going to tell you the graduations of the dial indicator. Okay? So when you look at a dial indicator, it's round, it has an arrow, and there's a million little tick marks around it. Okay? Each one of those tick marks is 1/1000th of an inch. Okay? So if that needle moves from here to here, okay, we're going to say that's 5/1000ths of an inch. Okay, which is practically invisible to our eye, you know. Okay, I think a piece of paper is 4/1000ths or something like that. So
What are you trying to get it to?
with this, you know, for me, if I'm under 10/1000ths, I'm happy.
10,000.
Okay, But books and everything else are gonna tell you, with the SawStop, the system is good enough, you can get it down to a couple of thousands. With something like this, if I can do 5, I'm happy. If I'm under 10, we're gonna be okay, okay? 8 always seems to be the magical number. We want 8 thousandths or less, okay?
Why is SawStop easier?
I will explain that in a second, yeah. So,
Sam, you also mentioned on the contractor ones that as you tighten it, it shifts again.
yes.
Same problem on this, or less
It's less likely on here because of how much this top weighs. We're not bringing 2 surfaces together. It's already sitting on here. With that, when I release it, technically we're opening a small gap, and now we're closing that gap to tighten it. Okay?
What I noticed with the Dow indicator is just by how much I press on it to move it, it'll shift 2 or 3 thou.
Yeah, that's true. I mean,
Very careful.
what we try and do when we're adjusting this is we're just going to try and be as consistent with our pressure on the body of the jig as possible. Okay, so I'm going to adjust this jig until I have the screw holes in a place where this tang, the tang of the dial indicator, is going to be touching that blade, but there's only so much travel in here, so we want it to touch somewhere where it's just pushing in 1/4 of an inch or something like that. And then I'm going to just put the 2 screws in there real quick to lock it down.
And that's perfectly 90, right?
Yes.
Screw in.
Although in theory, once it's locked, it doesn't matter.
Doesn't matter, huh?
Yeah.
That's why I was asking.
Yeah.
That might
So,
make sense.
so now,
It's all probably the same distance.
with these jigs, what we want to be careful of when we're using this, there's movement in here. So when we're using it, we're going to push and keep it tight to one side of this way. Okay? For me, it's easier to push. Some people pull it back. But either way, we want it to be against one of the sides of this miter gauge slot. So I'm going to put one tip on there, okay, at the back. It doesn't matter, front or back.
Does it have a zeroing out button? or you
It
just-
does. So I can release this. I can turn this until I'm on 0. And I'm going to lock it. Okay, now, I'm close enough to 0 anyway. Now I'm going to move it. Well, that is unbelievable to me.
Well done, man.
No, his side. Too many fist bumps.
I don't
The
buy
gauge
it.
is broken.
That was Harbor Freight gauge, that's what it is.
Yeah, that's shocking. to
That
me.
never happens.
That's never happened.
What is it, dead on?
It's not quite dead on. It's a difference of about 4 thousandths.
Under 5.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah.
But you don't get to show us.
Okay.
Fix it.
Well,
Somebody can nudge it.
Bring it down to 2, Sam. Come on, you can do it.
So what we're going for here. So when we're adjusting one of these, okay, what I do is I use a rubber mallet. Okay. So in the case of the Powermatic, it's kind of nice because we have 1 bolt in the back and 2 in the front. So I have a good pivot point here. So what I'm going to do here is, so what I'm going to do here is I'm just going to snug this guy up. Okay? I'm not crushing it. I mean, we're not tightening it to the max. So I'm just going to snug it up. Okay? And then I'm going to do that. Now, hopefully we're off enough that I can make my point here. So that's
Move
about,
now, right?
yeah. So that's still only about 5 thousandths, but. Okay. Geez, that's amazing to me.
Yeah.
Yeah, because I snugged up that back one, but, okay, so, well,
You made it worse.
no, for for the first time in my life, me touching it didn't make it work. Okay? So, when we're doing this though, we're gonna tighten the back, or if it's in the case of a Unicell, we have 4 bolts. We're gonna pick one corner, we're gonna snug it, and then we're gonna use it as our pivot point. And I'm going to use this mount, and you saw how lightly I tapped it.
Yeah.
And that light of a tap moves it about 2 or 3 thousandths. Okay? And now, one of the things, or what always confuses me when I do this, if I move this from front to back and it's off 20 thousandths, okay? What I'm gonna do, I'm not gonna look at this and say, well, it's going positive 20 thousandths or whatever, and try, well, do I wanna go? I'm just gonna give it a tap. I'm gonna say, did that gap get bigger or smaller? And if it got smaller, we're going in the right direction, and if it got bigger, I'm gonna tap it the other way. That's really all there is to this, okay? Yes?
Sometimes I've read where you're supposed to measure the same tooth front and back, so
Oh,
you
yeah,
rotate the blade.
Yes.
Different.
And now I have aligned, I'm not even kidding, at least 300 table saws. I have never found it to make a difference more than 1/1000th of an inch. Never. Now, I have found it to make a difference if it's a damaged table saw blade. Okay, but if it's a good table saw blade, I've never found it worth the trouble. Okay, and it is, I found, in my personal experience, I'm more likely to make a mistake when I'm doing it that way because the tooth is so small that my odds of not holding this the same or whatever, now I've slipped off, whatever, I adjusted, I think I needed to and I didn't. It seems like a hassle to me. Okay?
The idea being though to measure the tooth there, then spin the wheel forward, measure it in the
So you're doing the same tooth, yeah, that's the theory. But there again, well, and the thing is too, to me, it always comes back to this guy. This was good enough for 80 or 90 years. Now I'm within 4 thousandths on here. That's better than this guy ever got it.
Yeah.
You know?
So you're on a tooth, not the blade, because I always thought it was on the blade.
Sliding against the whole blade, right?
Yeah, in this case, I'm just using the body. I'm using the whole
Okay,
side of the
that's-
blade.
okay.
Yeah, I don't bother with the tooth.
Okay.
Yeah, the thing is make sure if you do use the tooth, you pick one or the other, because I can't be dropping off of a tooth in one spot and back on. Because there is a difference, a significant difference, if we do that. Okay, so then what we're going to do is we're going to tighten all 3 of these. Okay, and I'm going for broke now. I'm tightening them all the way.
This is past snug, you're really.
Yeah, I'm tightening them. Now, I'm not putting tremendous force because this is a cast iron top.
Good crack.
And, you know, a bolt is much harder than cast iron.
Right.
Okay? So if I crank on a bolt, I can pull those threads out of the top. Okay? And when I say that, I mean, I can put pretty good force on this and be okay. Don't put a pipe on this, okay, and crank on it to the gillies, because then you are going to do it. Then that's the last thing I'm going to do. Check it one more time.
2000.
Now, when we're doing this, once in a while, if like in this case, we have we're using a pivot bolt, okay? It could be a corner, it could be in the center. Once in a while, if I can't get it by tapping left, right, we do need to release this one and try tapping this corner and that corner, or this corner and that corner. If it's radically out, just pivoting on one bolt isn't quite enough, okay? So bear that in mind. Now with the SawStop, they did something very interesting to make this incredibly easy for us. The SawStop built in a pivot pin for us. Okay, so if you look at the top there, it goes into that hole. So I have a bedrock home in the front of this saw. Okay, So then when I put it on, I'm gonna put the 4 bolts in it. There's 4 bolts that go through these castings here. I'm gonna leave them loose. In the back part of that table, there's a set screw on either side that I can drive in or out to pivot it exactly against this cabinet. Okay? So they made it brainless. I mean, it's incredible. And on top of that too, because of those set screws, I can make minute adjustments. You really can get that within 1,000th of an inch if you decided to. I mean, you really could. Okay? So,
Has anybody else stolen that idea? Any other contract?
no, they may have a patent on it for a little while, you know.
Set screws?
No, not set screws, but the alignment system that they have.
Pivot point and the.
Yeah.
And
Now,
the set screws.
one thing I will say, when you're working on one of these old ones, it's always a good idea to check, because sometimes an old timer welded one of these in. Okay? Because people thought they didn't bother with the set screws, but they will weld the pivot point into some of those. So I've had that happen to me before, where I've gone to slide the top off and it won't go, and it's a pivot point is in there. Someone already put one in. Some guy, 40 years ago, who was a smart guy, said this is a hassle, and he put that pin in. Okay?
Engineer.
Should have patented.
Yeah, so there you have it. But just be wary of that, because it does happen.
So aside from the set screws, is pivoting off a pivot point or pivoting off a bolt, is the pivot point's going to work a little better?
It will work 100%. Yeah, because there is nothing to change in the front. It goes to the exact same spot every time.
So you're pretty close, and then it's just...
Yeah, so then I know all I have to do is swing it.
Right.
Yeah.
But you could be way off on a bolt.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, that's the thing. When you look at the elongations on those holes, you could be off a tremendous amount. And like I say, with that table, you can have it sit over so far that throw plate won't even work anymore. Right. I mean, you would think they wouldn't engineer it that way, but they have, But with this guy having that point up there into that, it's a pretty exact positioning, and you can only swing it then. That's all you can do, and it's incredible how quick and easy it is to set that in. Okay, does that make sense to everybody?
Yeah.
Now, one thing you will notice when I was running that along that blade, there is about a 1/1000th difference. That's just slight blowback on that needle. Now that could be difference of pressure. That could be there's 1/1000th of difference in the plate of that blade. So there is a little variation you play with to begin with. Okay, it's you can't get it so absolutely dead on the money. There's going to be 1/1000th or 2 of error, operator error.
How do you know if the blade is back? You just put it
this miter slot. Okay, so the reason this is important is because now we're going to adjust this fence off of this miter slot. Okay, now this is more than just the accuracy of the cut. Okay, if we don't have this fence aligned properly, there is a massive chance we're going to have a kickback for sure. Okay,
Especially if it's coming
now
in from the outside.
Yes, if this fence is kicked out, it gives us a raggedy, lousy cut, but it's not going to hurt us. Okay, if this fence is kicked in, we will definitely have a kickback. Okay, I mean it's almost impossible to avoid. Yes.
I have a question. A lot of times when I lock down the fence,
Yes.
it moves.
Oh, that's
The
it.
saw stops.
Yeah.
Should
So
move it to where it should be, right?
So one of the things that might work with that is when we are using the fence, any T-style fence, okay, including the bandsaws or anything, one of the problems moves because it's closing that gap. Okay, so whenever you use it, whenever I use them, I always hold them here instead of by the handle, so I can keep it firm and tight against this surface.
So you're pulling back.
Yeah. So this is a T-style fence. Okay, so it works a lot like a square. I mean, that's basically what it is. And if I don't have this surface that's riding against this surface tight to it, when I close that gap is when it's going to move. Okay. So when we're aligning one of these fences, now typically when I do this, I bump this in here until I'm feeling like this is flush here, okay? And then I'm trying to match it out here.
Or maybe a little more?
And now I'm doing this, what's that?
You want a little more, like you were saying, if anything?
Yeah, now
that out, or-
in this shop out here, I have them all a little bit kicked out because it's
Safer.
a little bit safer for intro students and things like that, okay? In your own shop, you can take that dial indicator, just like we did with the blade.
Yeah.
I can put it in here and I can measure this and maybe make that difference, maybe 3 thousandths kicked out in your own garage because you're not as scared. I mean, that's assuming you
You're
complete
standing out of the
this
way.
program and you're comfortable with your table saw and you're good with your table saw. But here, these are kicked out anywhere from 5 to 8 thousandths because it just gives a lot more safety for people who are unfamiliar with the table saw, and you're still getting a good cut, okay? If this thing gets out, 15 thousandths, 20 thousandths, that's when you're gonna start to see that more raggedy cut. Yes?
What do you mean when you say kicked out?
I mean,
Is misaligned to one direction?
yes. So when we have our blade here, we have our fence here, this fence is more away from the blade.
Because
Yes.
when it's the other way, it traps the piece to
Yes.
the blade.
So
and that's
if
what
we
causes
have
kick.
this kicked inward towards the blade, we're 100% gonna have a kickback. And that can be as little as 4 or 5 thousandths in is more than enough to give you a kickback, okay? So, now I will say when I do this, okay, I almost always do this by feel, okay?
And you're done?
Yeah,
No? Okay.
that's how I will usually do it. Now, like I said, if that isn't good enough for you, if you're concerned about that, you can always use that dial indicator with that same holder and do the exact same thing as we did with the blade and do it on this fence. Yeah, make sure it's on the table.
So you'd have the fence to the right, and then the dial indicator.
Well, it's a
Yes.
playing card
Yeah.
difference.
That's right.
It's a playing card difference.
Yeah, so I would call that 5, 6 thousandths, okay? So that's pretty rudimentary, but now if this is off, we're adjusting that with these set screws on either side of this T, okay? So,
See anything when you're leaning on the table like that.
okay, so if we look at the T, so if we're looking at this here, this T body here, okay, there's a set screw on either side, okay? Now when I drive those in, or I drive them, or I reverse them and draw them out, okay, that's going to change which direction this fence is orientated to our blade, okay? Now it does that, okay, by pushing on this piece of steel here, okay? So it, what's that?
The white part?
No, this band of
Okay.
steel
Oh,
here
I
is
see
pushed
now.
away from the main body,
By those screws.
okay? By the set screws.
Yes.
They're pushing against this
See
piece,
that open?
okay? And that's what's changing the angle of this fence, okay? Now, that's with a standard T-style fence, okay? Now, if you have an old Delta, it has a tube, a steel post along the front, a round steel post along the front, with a fence that fits onto that steel tube. In that case, there is several threaded studs that hold that pipe along the front, and we have to adjust the actual pipe to adjust this fence, okay?
Awesome.
So that's doable, but it's a pain, okay? The nice thing about that is, once you set it, it's set, I mean, it shouldn't change, but it takes a lot of time, okay? And that style of fence is on the sliding table saw, the SCM sliding table saw in there. That was the hardest part about putting that saw together. It does take time, okay? A lot of, well, contractors' table saws are kind of all over as far as their fences, but a lot of them have a central bolt here. Release that bolt, and this swings one way or the other. And that's true of a lot of the less complicated bandsaw fences. They're the same way. Okay? So there'll be one bolt, tighten it. The downside to those is, unlike these more positive systems, if that gets whacked or something, it will go out of alignment. Okay? So bear that in mind. Those are more likely to get out of alignment than this. This one's not quite as positive. That Delta one I was just talking about, although it's a nightmare to adjust, once it's locked in, it's kind of bomb-proof. This one isn't, okay? People taking these in and out all the time, you know, moving them all around. The other thing, too, people have a habit with these is they take them and they go over until they slam something, okay? So these do get out of adjustment. They're easy to adjust, but they do get out of adjustment.
The Biesmeyer is pretty similar to that, right?
It's exactly the same. Yes. Paul.
Oh, sorry. Could there be an issue with this piece being misaligned, which messes up your fence?
There can be, okay? So now this bar here, the main thing with this bar, it's held on by, I think it's 8 bolts across the front here, okay? Underneath here. Now with that bar, those holes are elongated. The main thing I find with those, when I put this on, I put all those in, I don't get them all the way, you know, I leave them loose. Then I take and I push this bar all the way to the back, and then I lock it down. Okay? It makes sure that we're parallel within reason, that I can have more than enough to compensate for this, but it also makes it so that as I'm adjusting this fence here, if I have to adjust this a lot, I am increasing the thickness of this area here on this fence, okay? As I increase that too much, depending on how much room I have in this little area it's living in, it's gonna bind up. If I have this all the way to the back, it's nearly impossible to bind this up, and I know I can always make adjustments without getting mad and having to undo all those bolts, okay? Because I can set this for how this fence is right out of the box, and now I've adjusted it 40,000 times and it binds all the time, and I'm pissed. Justin?
Sorry, the binding you're referring to, because I understand that the SawStop fence has 2 set screws that you can adjust the alignment, but
yes.
What are you referring to when you mean binding? Does it have to do with a rail?
Yes, so we have this rail in the front here, the steel bar,
right.
Okay? And we're talking about the distance of the front of that bar with the front of the table saw.
Okay.
I can have that distance so small that as I am adjusting this, I'm widening this and I get jammed.
I can't slide to the fence.
Yes, and that's happened on a couple of table saws out there before, because this thing here can also be bashed out of alignment. Okay? So if I hit this with a cart, okay, and now this end is brought in a little bit, this will start binding. Okay? So if I hit this with a cart, then I'm stuck too. Okay? I always like to just, I put together a lot of SawStops. I should say I put together a lot of Biesmeyer style fences. I always pull this thing to the back and I lock it down at the back. I don't think about anything else. Okay?
I wish I knew that before.
Yeah, I mean,
it took me so long.
That's the thing. It did me too.
Why didn't you call him?
You know, yeah. Call me before I first did the first 25, because I didn't figure it until after that either. But you know, I don't know even why they make them really adjustable. You know, I mean, it just makes more sense to have it all the way back and be done with it.
Or put that in the manual.
Yeah.
Yeah, that'd be good.
Okay.
Who's gonna read that?
So there is one other adjustment on these. Well, there's 2 others technically. We have, let's see. so inside of here, there's these two plastic neoprene points, okay? Those right on top of this. So what happens is they make sure that I don't have steel on steel rubbing here, okay? They are consumable because they slowly wear down as I'm using this, okay? So what I want to do is drive those in until I have about a 32nd of a gap here between this fence and this table, okay? Because what's going to happen is if I let this run down until the bottom of this is dragging along this table, when I go over these, at some point, it's going to grab this laminate and it's going to blow it out. Yes, Justin?
So the little nylon inserts that you say are consumable, how long are you finding that they last in like an environment like this?
Those have been out there over 10 years now, and I've never replaced one.
Okay.
Yeah. The one thing about them, well, I take that back. I did replace one. And that wasn't because it wore out. It was because somebody brought something across and hit it so hard they actually broke it.
I see.
Okay. But they hold up very, very well. Okay.
And you
So-
said how much of a gap again?
I try and get about a 32nd of an inch. Yeah.
You just whack it so you get it?
Oh, no, these are threaded.
Oh, the threaded.
Yeah,
Screw.
yeah. So an Allen will go into here and you can drive them in or out. Okay. Yeah, that's a good point. I didn't, yeah. Good catch there. Okay, so there is another one, an unadjustable just pad up here that rides along the other side. Okay, now that pad there again, here in this shop, there's a couple of them that are getting close, but they do eventually wear out, and it has a sticky back, PSA resin on it. So when the time comes, take a bead or chisel and just catch one corner and snap that off, and then stick the new one on. Okay, and this is true of the Biesemeyer fences. They all have these plastic parts too. One thing about these. Yes, sir.
Sorry, Sam.
No
That
problem.
seems to make a mark on the table.
Yeah, it's just kind of the nature of the beast.
Okay.
A lot of that is because we're dragging more than just a piece of plastic across this steel. We're dragging it through sawdust as well as the leavings of sanding a lot of times. There's a lot of contaminants on this surface that we're dragging back and forth across there. The other thing too is that's magnified a lot of times by the wax on there, because it rubs the wax off too. So you have kind of a visual difference between the wax surface and the non-wax surface.
They're
Okay.
just plastic pads, how would you replace them?
Well, this one here.
I mean, like, how would you buy one?
Well.
Yeah, what would you look up?
Yeah, typically what I would do, it is on the.
Just go to Biesemeyer.
Well, in this case, the SawStop, you can just get it right off the SawStop's website. It's easy. But if you have most fences, you can find the individual parts on ereplacementparts.com.
Oh.
It's on that list of contacts
Okay.
I gave. It's on Canvas.
Thank you.
But they have lots of the little penny ante stuff like that. Okay. And Biesemeyer, of course, if you have a Biesemeyer fence, it's easy to find that because you can just go right to the brand. So that's basically that. They have them on the insides on these as well, just so wherever it's going to rub on a metal surface. Now, one thing to be a little bit careful of with these two little guys who ride on the bar here is that you adjust them fairly evenly. And for most things, it doesn't matter that much. But if we put a tall fence on here for like starting to cut the curves for resaws, I can, in theory, tip this.
Yeah.
Obviously this is radically exaggerated. But on a 3-inch surface, 2.5-inch surface like we have here, it doesn't make that big of a difference. But if we have one of those sacrificial tall fences on here, now I have 18 inches, and this thing is off by, 10 thousandths or something like that. It's getting magnified and magnified and magnified to where when I'm running a piece on edge, like for Tony's method of putting those curves in there before I resaw a board, we're starting to basically cut an angled curve in there instead of a nice 90-degree curve. Even though we've used a square and we know that this blade is 90 degrees to this table, the fence is offsetting us.
So would you still just eyeball it, or would you use a feeler gauge, or what, to make sure that you're right on?
What I would do, I would adjust this one, say that's a 32nd, adjust this one and say that's a 32nd, and I would be happy with
Just
that.
visually.
I think it's more than enough.
Okay.
Yeah. Okay. Yes, John.
I noticed the fence is longer than the standard table of the saw. Is that because they assume you're gonna build an outfeed table?
Yeah, in most cases, it just gives you a more accurate surface. And I mean, almost all cabinet-style table saws, they're gonna have an outfeed table.
But this one we built ourselves here at Cerritos?
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Yeah.
You don't have to have it.
Yeah. I guess I should say they rarely come with an outfeed table. You build it, or you buy an aftermarket one. Like SawStop makes one for this, but it doesn't come with it. Okay. One other adjustment, the last adjustment on these, is we have an indicator here for our the measurement of the piece we're going to cut. Okay, so how that works is we have a piece of plastic here with elongated holes on it. Okay, so I can release these two screws, move it to the left or the right, and make up the difference. Okay, so typically what I'll do, I'll take something like this, I'll set it on here, I'll set it to a solid number, like I don't want to set it to 5 and 56 64ths, you know. What I want to do is I want to set this on 5 inches, cut a board, that board is now, I get it out and I say, okay, this is 4 15/16. I'm going to move this cursor to 4 15/16, not the fence, just the cursor. Okay? Now the cursor is matching what I'm cutting. Okay? Then take a second cut to make sure you did it right. Okay? Okay. So that's the main adjustments we have here for the fence. The other things to talk about here is the extension tables. Okay? When we're putting these on. Now, if you're putting these on, get a friend if you can, okay? Because it's an awkward thing. There's 3 bolts here that hold this together, okay? But this thing's kind of heavy. I mean, it's a slab of cast iron here, okay? So you have to hold it, get those 3 bolts into there, okay? And then get this flush with the top.
If you were to take the top off to clean it out or grease it or replace the belts or anything, can you leave those attached?
You can, yeah. You need help to lift it.
It wouldn't even be me. I would just be watching.
Yeah. But no, you definitely can.
Okay.
They connect to the other one, right? So that'd be really hard. I mean, this connects by bolts, right?
Yes, this connects by bolts to this.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
But it's still one top. I mean, we just made it bigger, but we can lift it off. You know, it's just heavier.
So you lift the whole top off.
Yeah. You know, I don't do it that way because I'm usually working alone and I can't lift it that way. Okay. Now, what I will do typically when I do something like this is I'm going to take this, I'm going to have somebody hold it for me. I'm going to put in the 3 bolts. I'm going to snug them. I'm going to take a wrench and I'm going to just get them snug, not tight like this is where we're leaving this thing. Okay. And I'm going to have this thing proud of this table. And then I'm going to take this mallet, a rubber mallet, and I'm going to slowly tap this down until I have it flush. Okay? Now, depending, a lot of times, these are not perfectly flat. Okay? Or they're not exactly the same dish or cup that our table saw top is. Okay? So in those cases, you can either depending on how bad it is, if it's, really bad, of course, you may want to contact the manufacturer. But in this case, there is a few thousandths difference on this one for sure. Now you can live with that, or if you want to, you can start in the front, get it perfectly flush up here, then move to the middle, and then the end, and you can apply, if you have a partner, a little bit of pressure, and you can flex these a little bit. Okay, there is some give to them, believe it or not. You wouldn't think so, but there is, you know. So you can flex some of that out if you need to. Okay?
And then just crank the bolts and keep it in place?
Yes. Now, typically myself, I don't think that's really worth it, to go to that extreme. If it's just off a few thousandths, I just live with it, okay? Every single one out there, people tell me how flush they are. They've been sanded thousands and thousands of times by me. They were not flush when I put them on, okay? They were off a few thousandths for sure, okay? And that's the way it is. Yeah, I've had people tell me, oh, I had to call SawStop like 5 different times to get one that was perfectly, and it's like, well, yeah. I mean, that's the nature. You know, when we cast a part, they're air cooled, and then they get machined flat, and then they're moved to 40 different environments. And you know, this one went to Tahiti, but this one went to Iceland, and now they're both here in California. I mean, they lived whole lives, you know. So, you know, typically a few thousandths isn't really anything I would worry about. And it's the same thing with tabletops. People will tell me it was out. They'll take a straight edge and they'll lay it from here to here, and they'll say there's a 16, 18 thousandths dish to the top of this. It's not a problem, you know. I mean, people will take a Grizzly table saw that has 30 thousandths of a dish, and it doesn't affect the cut at all. I mean, it's remarkable how little. Now, a joiner is a different story, okay? But a table saw doesn't make that much of a difference.
So this will lead me to the next question.
Yes.
How do you co-plan the sliding table saw out there?
Oh, you mean the slider to the tabletop? For that, what I would do is take a straight edge and clamp it to the table, the cast iron table of the saw itself. If you can, 2 of them, one for the front and one for the back of the table. And then on the SCM anyway, there's several bolts that you can adjust that table to bring it parallel to it. Yeah.
So what is the number that you can live with, like 16,000, 10,000?
For the slider to the table, you want that to be about probably 10 thousandths at the max, because you have a part that's sliding off of that table, now it's sliding onto that table. You want those to be pretty darn close so it's not catching on that edge as it goes on. You know, I mean, there's a little bit of sag in the panel depending on how big of an overhang there is, but you want those to be close. Okay.
This wood is not attached to this.
No.
It's just a dressing on the side.
Yeah. I don't know why they left it that way. Okay. Now, with the outfeed table, usually what I do with that is I want that to be maybe a 30-second below this surface. Okay. So that we don't have any possibility of our parts coming across and catching on this table. Okay, and that amount of drop is so small it doesn't make a difference in the cut, because we're not tilting in any way. We're going downward with it a little bit, and that's not going to affect the accuracy of the cut that we're making. Okay. Last thing that we really need to worry about adjusting is our throat plate. Okay. Now, most of these throat plates, it's the same on the Powermatic. There will be 4 set screws, okay, that I can drive in or out to change the orientation of the throat plate. Now, depending on the type of table saw, my Unisaw has the set screws on the tab, so not in the throat plate. Okay. Now, when we're adjusting one of these, there's 2 main things we're talking about: is its height and that it's not rocking. Okay, so it's very hard to get this dead on flush. Okay, it's nearly impossible. But what we want is the front of this to be slightly, by slightly I mean maybe 3 thousandths, 4 thousandths below the surface of this table. I don't want this to be above, because now I'm going to hit Okay?
The back should be above, right?
The back
Yeah.
should be the opposite.
Yeah, yeah.
Maybe 3/1000 above the table, 2 or 3/1000 above the table. Okay? So that we're not catching on this area here. Okay? But the other thing now, as we're adjusting that, is we want to be tapping on either side of these to make sure we don't have any wobble in this, okay, that it's sitting securely. Because believe it or not, I actually saw that happen one time. There was a throat plate that had quite a bit of wobble in it. And when the board was coming across, it wobbled at one side and the tooth caught it, and it threw the throat plate right past the guy. Yeah, I mean, it was pretty shocking. I was working on a joiner on the other side, the throat plate hit the wall and fell. And I was like, what the heck is, you know, I'm like, is there a bird in here? And it was, yeah, I mean, and you can imagine, I mean, you know, and this is a phenolic one. That was a Delta, so that was a steel, you know, a pressed steel throat plate coming off of there. So, you know, that's a bullet you don't want to get hit with, okay? Now, one other thing you can always check too with these, almost any table saw, if you're, you know, being safe with it, it either has a factory or or an aftermarket splitter or a riving knife. Now, to me, the difference is always the riving knife is just a knife. The splitter has 2 anti-kickback arms on it, okay? They both serve the same purpose, though. You have a piece of steel here that prevents our kerf from closing in on the blade, okay? Because that's the other way we're going to get a kickback, is if that kerf closes, grabs these back teeth, and now it comes back at us, okay? If you're cutting mahogany, you probably witnessed this a lot. You can watch as it's going out, and the kerf will go like this, or it'll go like this, okay? And if it closes, you're in trouble, okay? It will close on this knife and not catch these teeth.
So, no
Okay.
chance of kickback.
Yeah, well, there's definitely still a chance of a kickback, but it limits it, okay? Now, when we're adjusting these, we're going to take a straight edge and make sure we're on one tooth and one tooth, and make sure that this knife is in between the teeth on either side, okay? Now, depending on the style, there's a million different kinds. Biesemeyer's, I think there's washers that you put in or take out to move it right to left. In the case of the SawStop, that's the one feature of the SawStop I don't really like. It's just 2 bolts in an elongated hole. So you release those bolts and physically drag it in or out, and then tighten them, and of course it moves, okay? So it's annoying. It's not a real secure system. The Biesemeyer one's kind of nice because those washers are a guarantee. If I take out one washer, it's gonna go tight to the thing, and it is what it is, okay? But you do want to be careful of that. Make sure that's aligned, because you don't want to get all the way to here on the blade and hit this thing, and now I can't get by, and I need to decide what to do. And sometimes what I decide to do is let go of the board altogether. You know, I mean, you shouldn't, but people do. I mean, we're human, we make mistakes. And so you don't want to be in a situation where you can make a mistake. That's kind of the point of it, okay? Does that make sense? Okay. I think we've pretty much covered everything. Do we have, yes?
On my contractor saw, the fence has a pivot point or a lock on the front, and then also one on the back.
Oh, okay. Is it a Craftsman?
It's Bosch.
Oh, okay. Yeah, so, you know,
Any real difference or same principles?
It's basically the same principles. The only thing to remember with that is to make sure you do have it tight, because they have a tendency sometimes when they lock, they actually lock cockeyed, and so then when I go, it pops till it's nice and parallel. Okay, so if that thing goes on there, it's slightly like this. Now I crank it and it cranks tight. Okay, but in theory, if it takes any pressure, it's going to open up a gap in that clamp. okay? So just make sure that it's clamping parallel to the blade.
How do you do, I mean, every single time, there's always a chance that it's gonna go.
Well, what I would do is if you're concerned that that's an issue with it, is set it close to this miter gauge, do it 3 or 4 times in a row, and see if it's clamping fairly parallel each time to this miter gauge. And if it is, you're gonna say, well, luck of the draw is it's good to go. Okay. Now remember, if it pops, typically it's popping away from the blade, so it's giving you a nastier cut, but it's not putting you in more danger.
Do you use the same trick where you pull toward you to
I would.
Yeah, okay.
Yeah, because typically there's still some sort of a T-style front to it, you know. So as long as you're keeping it tight to you, you know, you should be eliminating that. And then just, you know, if you really are concerned about it, just give it 3 or 4 tries and just see. Just simple green like I do, and just leave it in overnight though. I put it in at night and clean it in the morning. Okay. But there is a video.
What about acetone?